Well, time to go to the next place, but first, let's try my new trick. Du bist jetzt 500 Goldstücke wert. Good. With this, I should be able to do things way more practically. So, let's go with... Il est complètement fait, il est complètement retard. Let's see. Place to flee, slave market, birds of unusual size. Let's not forget barbarians, as well as obsessions of our war machines. There is no doubt I am in the United States of Afghanistan. That means I need to be extra careful and prepare some protections in case I get attacked, just like now it seems. So good thing I brought my anti-cac protection. It will serve against the ice. So let's go. A safe and civilized location. A place of learning, which means I should be alone. So, guns. They tend to be contentious subjects. Medieval firearms is really a big subject of debate, especially in the RPG communities. Some people in D&D will be adamant there should be no guns, others kind of want revolvers to be used against Arthurian knight. So lots of nonsense. But what really is the situation for firearms in the medieval period now? Of course, most people have played or heard of Kingdom Come Deliverance too, but more than that, I think we should go with a chronological advancement to see how things really went and who should have been able to face what and what did they have in terms of equipment comparatively. So let's start with the 8th century. The 8th century, or should I say 8 to 13, is where things first started. So 8th century, we are in the 700s. In Europe, you've got Charles Martel and Charlemagne. The technology in terms of armor is that of short chain mail. So we're still in the late Roman level of protection. There's the expansion of Islam that happened during that time. In China, a bunch of alchemists tried to find immortality. They end up with black powder by mixing coal, which gives carbon, sulfur, and saltpeter, also known as potassium nitrate. By mixing the three, then you get the powder, and depending on the proportions, you get varying results. And eventually, by getting the right proportion, we go from black powder to gunpowder. In French, for the first, we say poudre noire. It was directly translated from French, but for gunpowder, we say poudre à canon, which would translate to cannon powder. Now, that's the 700s. We jump from the 900s to the 1200s, so 10th to 13th century. During that period, the Chinese use rockets, but there you have to think of weaponized fireworks. They also developed their own grenades that first are made out of clay, then metal, mostly iron. A bit later, thanks to the Silk Road, powder spreads, it gets into the Arab world, and then between 1150 and 1200, we get the Matfa, which is a powder-powered ballista. It launches a ballista-like bolt, but with a special bit to go into the weapon. From then on, we have to jump upon 1273. That's when we have the first bombard that I could find. So now we truly are with a proto-cannon, but not a true cannon yet. 7 years later, we know that the Franks, or if you prefer the French, first developed their own equivalent of the matfa. It's called pot de fer à trait garrot. Not quite sure how to translate garrot, but trait means a ballista bolt and pot de fer is iron pot. It's basically the same thing. We also know that during the 13th century, we have Marcus Graecus, who at some point writes the Liber which is the book that describes several fire-based weapons, including the first gunpowder weapon that we know of. And that means the first description of the petard, which is a first type of proto-mine that was used to be put under foundations in order to weaken or even destroy them. But of course, first being described does not mean first successfully used, and the first successful case I am aware of is a bit later in 1443 by Louis XI during the Battle of Dieppe, so really in the end of the 100-Year War. Oh, and naturally, during this time and even before, we got the Byzantines who have their Greek fire, a so-called white fire, but that is not the point of the video. We are really focusing on the powder weapons. But yeah, Byzantines did have their own grenades that were pretty much just fancy Molotov cocktails. So then we go upon the 14th century, also known as the 1300s. Now, in late 1200s, we've got the end of the Crusader states. We have Marco Polo starting his thing. As I said, the manga started out during the 1200s, so 13th century. During the 14th century, they fully reach Eastern Europe and do their things over there. 13th century is also where full plate will be developed. At the start, people still are pretty much in full mail, but then plates will develop progressively thanks to advances in metallurgy. We also have the invention of brigandine. It is where the Templars are sadly undone. It is where the Black Death happened, where the 100-Year War happened. Going back to the weapons, they mostly get spread. So we know that in 1324, we got the first known use of a bombard in Réole by the French. Then 22 years later, in 1346, the English used bombardelle, which is a small bombard if you prefer. Then we jump to 1370, and that's when the first handguns are developed. So when you see fire spears, fire sticks and whatnot, or if you prefer the weapons in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, that's what gets invented. And 1370 is 33 years before the Kingdom Come Deliverance games, so Henry isn't even born yet. We also see another weapon that is similar, which is called the Arquebuse or arquebute in French. It is a hook gun, so we've got the hook, spike or whatever, and it serves to put it on a bit of fortification so it can absorb the shock, or that it can be put on pretty much anything so that it would aim better. So both weapons works by just putting a small amount of powder. You got the bullet. There is a small bit at the end of the cannon where there's more powder. You use a bout-feu, which is a stick that has a burning thread on it. With the stick, you ignite the small pretty brands that has powder in it. It then burns, ignite the main stack of powder, and then launch the bullet. Quickly enough, also, people will invent the canepin, which is a bit of cloth that you put the bullet in, and then it covers the extra space between the bullet and the cannon, which makes it tighter. Everything being packed tighter makes it more efficient. It goes faster, and so on. Then we jump another decade to 13 AD. Then we get the next advances with the plumet, which is the precursor of la mitraille. In both cases, I think they translate to scatter shot. So the idea of having lots of metal bits, just that now you put them into your bombard in order to deal a lot of damage that is spread out instead of just having your bullet that concentrates it. We also have the firebox, so boîte à feu. It serves to have all the powder and sometimes also the projectiles in a single package. It's a first attempt, let's say that, but it will eventually give rise to the apôtre. Apostle, if you prefer, a wooden container that contains the powder, and the cargousse, which will evolve into cartouche. The word would eventually evolve to represent the bullet in modern time, but back in the day, it's a bit of cloth or even paper that has the correct amount of powder in it. You rip it open, put your powder, then you use the cloth as a canepin to keep the bullet in place. We also have the first attempts at something called culasse mobile, so the idea being to open the back of the weapon to load in the back. Not really efficient yet, and there's a lot of ideas that will come and go because the rest of the technology is not fit yet for the idea. And we also have in 1380 Jean Froissart, who invents the rocket launcher. Not what you think. Once again, it's a small proto-cannon that serves to more precisely launch the weaponized fireworks. Think Chinese rockets, and with this we go to the 15th century. Now, the 15th century or 1400s were at the very end. So 1370, when guns were invented, that's in the 100 to 130 last years. Kingdom Come events in 1403. Then this point we truly are at the end of the period, the last 10%, more or less, depending on how we count. And now everyone is in full plate. So 7 years after the game, we have the culverin that is invented, culverin in French. So culverin is of course an attempt to translate the French word. As for the French word, culverin comes from the word couleuvre, which is a type of snake. Because it looked like snake, it basically was a type of hand cannon that eventually got longer, became more of a smaller size cannon, and it was used on the ground. Because it was on the ground, it was the long tube that evoked the snake, hence the name. Then 20 years later, by basically having a bunch of culverins together on a sport, we got the ribotquin, also known as the organ, because it looked like the musical instrument. Those two will speak to the Age of Empire players, since it's been in the 3rd and 4th game. Then a bit later, in 1445, we have the first true cannon, and not cannon in terms of the cylindrical part, but as the weapon itself, invented by the Bureau brothers. Bureau could translate to desk, office, and so on. The Bureau brothers, we mostly known of Jehan, who not only invented it, but was good at using it. And by the way, Saint Jeanne d'Arc also was very good at using artillery. She would know in advance where artillery would land, which made her very efficient at using it. As for Jean Bureau, between his part in the invention of the cannon and his good use of it, it would be made at night, fully made part of the nobility. So yeah, we're really at the end of the 100-Year War, and that's it. A bit later, in 1460, we have the invention of the arquebuse. Now the idea is that you take your handgun, you put it in something that starts to look like a stock for a modern weapon, and the bout de feu, you give it a smaller snake-like shape, hence the name Serpentin, and then it's the start of the matchlock weapon. And when I first mentioned the cargousse or cartouche, it's also in the 1460s that they are invented. Then in 1466, we have the first known use of European grenades. So they are like the Chinese ones, but they are shaped like gold. So I won't say water skin, but it's not quite exact. Think water bottle. Nonetheless, they're shaped like that. First of all, out of clay, then metal, and in it they eventually put little bits of hard rock, then bits of metal. It's the first known use of grenades, and that's really at the end, but in this case, yes, it could have been used a bit earlier. And finally, in 1480, we have Gaspar Zollner, an Austrian, who first develops the filing in weapon. At first, it's straight filing. It serves to guide the bullet, because normally the bullet, especially if it's loose, will bounce off, and its last bounce will change its direction. The idea is to guide it. It's not very efficient yet. He was a bit ahead of his time. And 1480, sometimes depending on how we calculate, we're already in the Renaissance. For others, we're still in the medieval era, but at the very end. And now we go to the Dark Age of humanity, the Renaissance. So we start in the 16th century, the 1500s, in 1510 to 1515 with the patine à rouet. So if you prefer the internal firing mechanism, it is the start of Trigger and Company. And when you have an idea, the matchlock that pull the trigger, you've got a little bit with the thread that closes. That is the patin à rouet. A bit later in 1520, August Cotter, a German this time, invents the helicoidal filing, so the spiral shape filing. We still have that in modern firearm, or more should I say, now all modern firearms have it. It's just that back in the day, it was too advanced for the rest of the technology, because when you have to front reload and everything, the filing makes reloading longer, which is not a good thing back in the time. And it also doesn't work when the bullet does not have the correct size. So plenty of problems, and many inventions like that will come and go until sufficient standardization and rest of technology catch up. The arquebuse, which I should have said was longer from the first 10 cannon. The cannon have been made longer, which made the weapon more powerful because the bullet could accelerate longer, and it also made it more precise. Was then shortened to create the pistol, which has its own usefulness. So start of the matchlock pistol 1520. Following year in 1521, the opposite happens. The arquebuse is made longer and better, and that's the start of the musket. Then we jump a bit to 1560 with the first use of flint. It's the patin à silex, or if you prefer, the start of flintlock. Of course, flint doesn't overtake and replace matchlock. They both coexisted for a bit, but yeah. We are now in flintlock territory, and then to give an idea, the next real big invention will be in 1669 with the start of the bayonet, and the first true standardization that I'm aware of in terms of firearm goes to the 1700s in 1703 with the muskets in France being standardized under the name mousquet à fusil, and fusil is the French word for the medieval lighter, flint and steel that you call it in English. So it was called a fusil, the flint and steel, because it was a flintlock. Then it was called mousquet à fusil, but then it was shortened to fusil, which became the French word for rifle. English version of name I'm not so sure of. And if I am to give bits of standards, 1520-21 for the muskets and the pistols. A bit later, 1534, we've got Lacartier who arrives on the New World. I spoke of 1560 for flint. 43 years later, in 1603, Champlain becomes the founder of Canada with La Grande Alliance. Then 5 years later of Quebec. The colonization in North America is in full swing by the time bayonet come in, but bayonet, when it arrives, it is not as good. So we have to put it in the barrel, which means you can shoot. Sometimes it's too loose or get stuck, so it gets a bit of problems, but eventually guns get evolution so that you can fix it in a more efficient way and truly start using spare-like. Standardization happens and makes weapon better. The cartouche that I mentioned truly become standardized along with a lot of other things during the Napoleonic era. And then eventually we get further advances. Percussion firing, like in modern weapon, that's really in the late 19th century. So Napoleon is early 19th century, or 1800s if you prefer. In the late part, that is when we invent percussion firing, and of course the modern bullet with the hard shell and the powder in it, etc., etc. Having percussion and hard shell, well, it goes together and it makes for easy reload, but also standardized reload. And with the standardized things where every bullet is the same, therefore can make all the guns the same, at least for the bullet caliber. And that's when filing come in use. So you've got the US Civil War, then the part where the Lucky Luke happens, and that's when exactly the modern firearms are invented. And afterwards, well, aside from more artillery-like guns that technically are the first automatic weapon. For the automatic weapon, we get the first attempt towards the end of the First World War. It's the first prototypes, but it's later that we start them in use, and they only become standardized from World War II onward. So now for the conclusion. To conclude, for the medieval era, as you can see, firearm, or should I say gunpowder based weapons, are mostly artillery. Gunpowder is invented, takes time for it to become a weapon, and then you got rockets, got powder ballistas, you got eventually cannons, well, the old family of cannon, and only towards the very end, when full plate is in use, do we get hand weapons. And the hand weapons is really the start of everything. They're fired with a separate stick. Armor can still block them. In fact, most armors were bulletproof at that time, but firearms, well, personal firearms and cannon and whatnot against chainmail did not happen. Guns versus artillery knights would never have happened. Very not. Revolvers against artillery knights. Matchlock and so on, that's afterward. Flintlock even more so. But grenades, yes, of course sometimes you got a few anachronistic things, but they're not that efficient and they take time to arrive. So yeah, mostly artillery. And I should go away. Time for Mortal Kombat level change.